As you know, we have Brigadier Ritchie with us. His first name is Charles. I will let you, Charles, let us know whether you prefer your title or your first name as we get going. As you could tell from the information, he comes to us from an assignment back during the Cold War with, if I say bricksmith, is that kind of how you said it?
That's it, but I will cover that in what I'm going to be saying now. I'll explain what it
Okay,
stands.
great. So obviously what you know about that, though, is it was a liaison mission during the Cold War behind the Iron Curtain to liaise between the East and the West. And I'm sure you have some amazing stories to tell us. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you with just one more caveat, and that is, as you know, please mute your lines just because we all tend to scratch around a little bit, and it magnifies once you get on the phone. So you mute, and then remember to unmute when he opens up for questions. Let's go forward. So I'll turn it over to you.
Right, that's it. Well, first of all, I'd like to say what a great honor it is to be invited to speak to you. As I said, who I actually am, I'm a retired British Army, as you say in America, Brigadier General, and I served from 1960 to 1997, ending up in Paris as the military attaché at the British Embassy. But I did serve in Berlin, Potsdam, and East Germany from February 1978 to September 1980, when I was actually thrown out, and I'll tell you why they threw me out. For activities incompatible with my status as an accredited member of military mission. Bricksmith is what we were, and Bricksmith simply stands for the British Commanders-in-Chief Military Mission to the Soviet group of forces in Germany. There was also an American mission at the same time as I was there, and the American mission were also based in Potsdam, and they were, just writing down the numbers, I wrote it down, I've gone and lost it now, and there were members of the British military mission alongside the Americans and alongside the French. There were 18 Americans and 14 French. All of us were accredited to the Soviet Army, and we had to hand in our national identity cards, and I was issued with a Soviet Army identity card, which meant I could ignore what the police told me to do and stuff the East German Secret Service. And the mission went on until we were actually disbanded on the 10th of December 1990, 1 year after the Berlin Wall came down. Now, what I thought I'd do, I'd just start to give the very briefest facts on the Cold War, and then end up also talking about the Bridge of Spies, where I will then pause. As you may or may not know, after World War II, Berlin was cut up into 4 zones: a French zone, American, and a British zone, and the Soviet zone was in fact East Berlin. But of course, after the war, the whole of Germany was chopped up into 4 pieces, and the Russians took most of what became now East Germany. And to get to Berlin, we had to either drive up what's called the Berlin Corridor, go by train, or fly in. That was the only way we could get there, which made life more interesting than usual. Now, what I wanted to go on was to say that really the Cold War began with when the Russians cut off all road and rail links to Berlin, and that was in the 28th of June 1948. And so mainly and only really the Americans and the British organized the Berlin airlift to bring food and supplies to people living in West Berlin. And to give you an idea of the amount, it was 2,500 tons a day of food, 275,000 flights, delivering a total of 2.5 million tons of food to Berlin. Sadly, 60 United States Air Force were killed, along with the British, in deaths of airplanes that crashed on the way there. However, on 12th of May 1949, Stalin opened up the land access. And that really was when we learned to live as we were. 23rd of May 1949, West Germany became a state, and on 7th of October 1949, East Germany became a state. But it wasn't a very happy breakup, and as you know, the Berlin Wall was built on the 13th of August 1961 and came down on the 9th of November 89. The most famous visit to the wall was President Kennedy when he arrived in June 1963 and made the expression "Ich bin ein Berliner," caused much laughter, I regret to say, because what he actually said in German was "Ich bin ein Berliner," I am a roll, a bread roll, because that's what a Berliner was called. So there we are. It's actually a donut. A Berliner is a donut. And of course, the real drama started in the Cold War when, of course, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan with 25,000 troops and stayed for 10 years. And they lost between 14 and 22,000 troops were killed. Because the Soviets wrongly thought that if the Muslims won in Afghanistan, it would affect the Muslim tribesmen in the south of Russia. But really, that's the only thing I want to say about the Cold War, because we were there at the height of the Cold War when the Russians in East Germany had 20 divisions. If you don't know what division is, I'll explain. The Russians in East Germany, when I was there, had 360,000 soldiers, 5,000 main battle tanks, 10,000 armored personnel carriers, 3,500 artillery pieces. And the East Germans had their own armed forces with 176,000 regular and conscript soldiers. They had 49,000 to guard the border, 5,000 East German Secret Servicemen who were an absolute pain. I'll tell you more about those later. 12,000 police and 500,000 reservists. And that's what we were facing when we were based in Potsdam and also in East Berlin. It was too difficult. All our families used to live in Potsdam, but living in East Germany was impossible. If the wives wanted to go to a butcher shop, they had to be there for 8:30 in the morning for a sort of 1 o'clock open the shops. Life was really not good there at all. And so what we did, we moved all our families out. That's the French, the French, the Americans, and ourselves to West Berlin, and we just used a lovely house we had, as did the Americans, when we were there. I'm going to go on to talk about the Berlin Wall and then pause before we move on to the Bridge of Spies, because the Berlin Wall is quite extraordinary, and it's hard to get your head around the fact that the Berlin Wall ran for 165 kilometers. I should put this in miles for you. That's roughly 100 miles. The concrete wall ran for rather 80 miles. There was about 40 miles of wire netting fencing. There was barbed wire there as well, but only on the bits really close to where West Berlin and East Berlin came to meet each other. And that was 5 miles. There was 60 miles of ditches. There was 80 miles of contact alarm fences. There were 289 watchtowers, each with sentries in, who were sort of able to fire guns at us. There were 272 guard dog runs, Alsatians. So to get from one to the other, you had to go through a dog run, and the dogs liked a nice piece of juicy arm or leg. And there were, during the time the war was up, there were 1,603 shootings by border guards against people trying to escape. And it was really, 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 really bad for those who were there. People would risk their lives trying to come over the border. And of the refugees who did cross over to get to the Berlin Wall, 546 were Soviet East German members of the armed forces and police. 38,495 were just refugees, and of those, 72 were killed, 55 of them being shot, and 113 others were injured by firearms. So that gives you the horrendous Berlin Wall that was up. And of course, we, that's the French, the Americans, the British, were allowed to cross into East Berlin, but only through Checkpoint Charlie, which is where the Americans had their control teams, and barriers and all the rest of it. And if we wanted to go from West Berlin to East Berlin, we simply clocked in at the American point, where there was a British military policeman, and the East German border guards just had to raise the barriers and let us through. We completely ignored them. Because as far as we're concerned, please remember, East Berlin was not East Germany. It was the Soviet zone of West Berlin. And that's how we, I'm afraid, used to behave. And we could then move on to the Bridge of Spies. So I think I'll just take a pause there and see if anybody wants to ask any questions so far. If not, deadly silence. We'll go to the Bridge of Spies, which hopefully you've all either seen the film or read the book. Now, the Bridge of Spies, it's a place called the Glienicke Bridge, which is from the United States sector of West Berlin, direct access into East Germany. So that bridge people used to cross almost on a daily basis, and if you saw the film, you would see that there's a Soviet checkpoint and the East German checkpoint. All of us just ignored the East German checkpoint and went to the Soviet checkpoint where they checked our identity cards, the car pass, all the rest of it. And so the Glienicke Bridge was the main point of contact between East Germany and Berlin. Now, what was interesting about the Bridge of Spies was, you may remember that Gary Powers, the United States Air Force pilot, was flying a U-2 and he was shot down over the Soviet Union. He was flying what's called a U-2. That was an observation plane, a single-engined jet plane with huge wings that could fly at enormous heights with amazing cameras and photograph almost anything we wanted from the sky. And he was shot down and he survived and obviously was put into prison. The other American, was Frederick Pryor, who actually was an American doctor, mistakenly identified as a spy, which he was not. And the third and most important member was a guy called Rudolf Abel, who was a Soviet spy. And for those who know New York, he was arrested in New York City at the Latham Hotel, Latham Hotel, I don't know how you pronounce it, on the 21st of June, 1957. And the agreement was that they should be exchanged across the Glienicke Bridge, the Bridge of Spies. But what happened first was because Frederick Pryor was not a spy, and the Russians accepted it, he was handed over to his parents at Checkpoint Charlie. And once that had happened, then the whistle went and others were exchanged at Checkpoint Charlie. So the Americans brought over Rudolf Abel, and the Russians brought over Gary Powers, and that was where the exchange took place. And it was an extraordinary meeting, but obviously not when I was there. But there we are. So, any questions about Bridge of Spies?
What was the name of the movie that you referenced?
The name of the bridge?
No, the name of the movie that you were referencing.
Oh, the movie is called Bridge of Spies.
Oh, Bridge of Spies. Oh, thank you.
And it's also a book. There's a book called The Bridge of Spies, which is by somebody called Giles Whittle. I'll say the name again. Giles Whittle, Gileswhittel. And that's the book. And there's also the film and the book of The Bridge of Spies. And what's interesting, that to make the film, they turned the Glienicke Bridge back to how it looked before the wall came down. And it's amazing, with the Soviet checkpoint on one side of the bridge and just opposite it, the East German checkpoint. So that is it. So it's well worth reading and seeing the film. Next question. If not, I will then continue. Right. Well, my next point was people ask and always ask me, what was it like living in East Germany? And the answer was, it was hellish. And that's why all the Allied families went back. But if you lived in the DDR, basically you had to join the Communist Party. If you joined the Communist Party, you got priority of everything. Your children could go to summer camps. But if you were a churchgoer, you were banned from everything. Why it was so strange living in East Germany was, hello, that nobody was unemployed. There was 100% employment. But they weren't often in real jobs. You went to a cafe or bar, and about 6 barmen would appear. And I remember my favorite story was that in a place called Treuenbrietzen, just south of Berlin, there was a lovely modern railway shop. And we bought wonderful model railways for absolutely nothing. And when we first went in there were 2 people serving. 4 months later, there were 3 people serving. 4 months later, there were 4 people serving. So it went on. So they must have had maybe 6 customers a day, and there were about 8 people serving there because everybody had a job. There was no unemployment. And particularly out in obviously on the agricultural, they had the combinats where the huge farms were there. And again, everybody was working. If you lived in a village, you worked on the combinat farm. You'd collect everything, you'd be paid, and they literally did nothing except watch the grass grow. But that's how it was. Why it was so difficult, though, for East Germans was, as I said, there was nothing there. And we used to annoy the East German Secret Service people and the police who used to follow us by simply putting bananas in the rear window. You could not buy bananas in East Germany. Also, the Americans did more than we did. They used to, when they stopped anywhere, all these German children knew that Americans had chewing gum, because you could not buy chewing gum in East Germany. And so everybody would give these German children until eventually it had to be stopped when I was there, because I regret to say the Americans were passing out chewing gum when a child ran across the road without looking and was run over and killed. So we were all asked, please don't give chewing gum to the children, which we didn't. But it was not fun, and I remember my wife and I, we went to a restaurant in East Berlin, and as soon as we entered, because we had to wear uniform in East Berlin, they threw all the other people out, because they didn't want any people to meet up with members of the Allied forces based in West Berlin or wherever we were. So it was quite extraordinary. It really, really was. And what I have got to do is finding... Oh, yeah, right. I've lost a piece of vital paper here. Oh, yeah. I might have to get my wife to go and get it. No, it's not. It's some of the stories that we had about living in East Germany. I ought to explain. First of all the 3 missions, that's the French mission of 12, the American mission of 18, the British mission, we all had exactly the same vehicles. And we were allowed to travel around all over East Germany. Our main mission, of course, was to gather intelligence. And that's what we did. We were professional intelligence gatherers. And it was an interesting time because we would stop, we would photograph trains, everything on the trains. If we passed Soviet barracks, we'd do what we could. But also, we used to do rather naughty things in our mission. And what we would do at night, Americans along with us, we'd make sure we weren't being followed, knew where the Russian training areas were, put on 4-wheel drive, go in, but switch off all our lights. So we had no brake lights, no nothing, and we moved on to infrared headlights. So we were able to drive through Russian training areas using infrared headlights. The danger was wild animals, mainly deer and wild boar, pig, couldn't, of course, see us. They could hear us, so we kept bumping into them. But that was what we did. Our main was to gather intelligence, which we did. We reckon we knew every single registration number of every vehicle the Soviets and German had, how many tanks they had, where they go, where they went. We also did very naughty things, such as we'd go to a bunker on a Russian holiday, photograph the padlock on the bunker, and then get one either from the American military attaché or the British military attaché from Moscow, cut it, move into the bunker, do what we had to do, photograph their plans for World War III, and then put a rusted, especially rusted padlock back onto the bunker and leave and hope we weren't caught. But mainly our job, as I said, was to gather intelligence, which is what we did. Now, the only other thing I think now is I've got various, stories to tell you, but I will take any serious questions you might have now. Anyone got a serious question?
This is Victor Benson. I missed the first 2 minutes or 3 minutes. At that point in time, you were in the military or working for the British government?
No, it's entirely military. It was during my military career. I served in the British Army from 1960 to 1997, and I was with the British military mission. Hang on, sorry, my wife will have to leave the room because there's another. And I was part of the British Army, and all the members of the military missions that were drawn from the Royal Air Force, British Royal Air Force, and the Army, the American United States Air Force, the United States Army, and the French Air Force and Army. And we were all based there, based intelligence gathering. I was what's called the Chief Operations Officer, and my job was to target our intelligence activity in cooperation with the Americans and the French to the 6,500 Soviet and East German training areas, barracks, radar stations, radio stations, and missile sites. And we always looked the same. We wore almost identical uniform, identical boots, so our footprints, they could never tell whether we were British or French. We were very naughty going out in the winter because we'd spray water on the front number plate and the rear number plates, and then throw snow over it if it was snowing. So the Russians had no idea whether it was a British, French, or American mission. And before coming back into Potsdam, we'd clean our number plates. The idea was we looked the same and did the same sort of activities. But sadly, I will have to say this, because it's in my line, we only lost 2 people from the military mission. One of our soldiers was actually shot, who was called Corporal Day, but he survived. Sadly, on the 22nd of March 1984, the Russians knowingly and deliberately rammed a French car, killing what's called adjutant-chef. He was a sergeant major, senior non-commissioned officer in the French army. And then the saddest of all was Major Arthur Nicholson, known as Nick Nicholson, of the United States Army. He was shot and killed by the Russians on the 24th of March 1985. So it's well worth Googling Major Arthur, brackets, Nick Nicholson, Nichoolcon, of the USMLM. Now, what he was doing, so you know, was because we, the British, had 34 members in the mission, we put 3 into each of our tool vehicles, our Range Rovers and our cars. The Americans, because you only had 18, could only put a driver and a tour officer into the front of their cars. So, through other means, Major Nicholson went on to the Soviet training area, a place called Troyen-Brietzen, to try and get into a Soviet tank shed on the training area with a view to taking a piece of reactive armor off the tank. Because the Soviets had reactive armor, which we in the West didn't have any. And it meant that with reactive armor, all our tank guns couldn't penetrate the armor of Soviet tanks. So what he did was extremely brave. He went along, but sadly, he was spotted, and they thought he was maybe a forester, and he ran off. So he came back a second night, and this time they were waiting for him. And as he got near the shed, they challenged him. He did run off, and they then shot at him. He managed to get back to the car, which was surrounded by Soviets. The Soviets wouldn't let him back in the car. They would not let the American driver get out of the car and treat him, and he died of loss of blood beside his car. So that was the only person in the history of the 3 missions, really, who was killed, who was shot. And it was all very, very sad. There's a memorial to him. The Soviets apologized. It was all absolutely dreadful. So there we are. So that's a little bit you missed. Now, what else can I say? I think we would behave normally, and we used to go to town tours. And there's a famous story about a town tour, which I went on, and you stayed in a smart hotel. And when I was leaving, I was the owner on his own. He said, about 2 years ago, one of your Royal Air Force stayed here, and he left these 2 films underneath his pillow. I thought you might like to have them back. And he handed them to me. No one saw him hand them to me, and it was photographs of Russian airplanes that a Royal Air Force tour had taken 2 years earlier. So that was it. Now, anything else? Any other questions before I continue with telling you, I think, some stories you might like to hear? And,
this is Vicki.
Again?
All right, I'll go. Brigadier, this
Go
is
ahead.
Vicki Sebastiani in California, and thank you so much for being on our call. I'm a little confused. You mentioned that everyone had a job, 100% of the people. Did you also have a job?
No. We were all military men. We were dressed in either British Armed Forces uniform, American Armed Forces uniform, or French Armed Forces uniform. We were a proper military mission attached to the Soviet Army in East Germany. Because the Soviet Army, they had a military mission with the United States of America in Frankfurt. They had a military mission attached to the French, and they also had, with us in West Germany, a military mission attached to them. And we provided them with housing, we provided them with food, free petrol for their cars, and everything they need. So we did not pretend to be anything other than serving members of our respective national armed forces. We were liaison officers. So that's what we actually did. And I mean, I give a good example. I was on duty one day when the Russian officer of a thing called the Soviet External Relations Branch, based in Potsdam, and they were to look after all the military missions. And I was rung up. I was a major then. He said, Major Ritchie, will you please come to the Soviet External Relations Branch? We've got 2 of your soldiers here. What are you talking about? So I went to the Soviet External Relations Branch, about 5 minutes drive away, and there were 2 very hungover Scottish Army soldiers. So I said, what the hell are you guys doing here? They said, well, sir, we were skiing in the south of West Germany, but I'm afraid, sir, we got very drunk, sir. And we attacked one of our sergeants. And we were put under close arrest and told we'd end up in jail for this. But, sir, we were very drunk, so we thought we'd escape to East Germany. So what do? We climbed up the wire wall on the side of East Germany. We jumped into the minefield, and these 2 guys staggered through the minefield. Because they were drunk, they weren't walking in a straight line. They didn't set any of the anti-personnel mines off. They then got to the dog run, where they saw these Alsatian dogs running up and down, and that's when they said, we'll decide to surrender. And they were taken into custody by the East Germans, who handed them over to the Russians. So that is doing our liaison work. And I then rang up the battalion and said, I got 2 of your soldiers here, Private MacDonald and Private McAllister. What are they doing? I said, they decided to escape to East Germany for some reason, better known to themselves. They jumped into a landmine. I got them here. Then I'm going to bring them back to West Berlin, where you are to come and collect them and take them back to the barracks and deal with them appropriately. Right, sir? So that's what I call liaison officer work. Also, senior British officers visiting Russians. We'd organize the visit and liaise. And when Russian seniors went to West Germany, their mission would look after them and arrange the program. But the Russians had a bit of a problem, because when they stayed in a West German hotel, they arrived with huge empty suitcases, and they would steal the sheets, the pillowcases, the soap, the lavatory paper, everything you've got. Because even the senior Russian officers had a problem, as did when we gave a film night in our lovely mission house in Potsdam in East Germany. My first arrival, I saw all these women doing. And the women were all in the sort of hall area. I said, they're waiting for the senior Russian general's wife to arrive. Why? You will see. And the great announcement, the senior Russian general arrived, the sort of 3-star, 4-star general, and he went through for drinks, and they loved gin and tonic, by the way, and Scotch whiskey. And the senior wife then went into the ladies' toilet with a big empty bag. She came out with a bag full. Then our senior warrant officer's wife went in, nodded, and the next wife went in. She came out with a bag full of things. I said, what is going on, sir? In order of seniority of their husbands, the wives go into the lavatories and they steal the lavatory paper, the hand towels, the eau de cologne, the hand cream, the face cream. They steal everything because even they can't buy this sort of thing in East Germany. And when every wife had gone in and removed whatever they wanted to remove, they didn't steal again. And that was welcome to East Germany. I think I ought to explain, too, that, and I'm looking at one now, everywhere we weren't allowed to go, the Russians put up signs. It said in 4 languages, Russian, German, English, and French, attention, the passage of foreign military liaison missions is forbidden beyond this point. And that, I'm afraid, was what happened to Nick Nicholson. He went, past the sign. So what we used to do, we used to unscrew the signs, put them in the boot of our car, and sell them in West Germany. And we got a lot of money for them. But one of the other things we did was we looked after people if we saw them hurt. And I remember once driving down the road on the bit where West Germans could go between West Berlin and East Berlin. There was a West German had run into a tree. So what we did was we got out, we treated him, we helped him in every possible way, and he wanted to know our details, which I gave him, and he thanked me profusely. Next thing I knew, I got a lawyer's letter saying that I had given the wrong type of aid to so-and-so, he's now very ill, and he was suing me for a vast sum of money for amateur treatment of an injured person on the road. So I got the British Army lawyer to write back to him and said, thank you very much, yes, we acknowledge Major Ritchie did treat you, but he was on duty at the time as attached to the Soviet Army, who were responsible for all his actions while he's in East Germany. So please send your claim to Colonel General Grinkiewicz, Chief of Staff, Headquarters Group of Soviet Forces, Germany, Zossen-Wunsdorf, East Germany, 81923. And that was the last I heard of it. So there we were. But what also happened, I'm slightly watching the time so I can take more questions. I've been on for 35 minutes. I will tell you 2 interesting stories. The Stasi, that's the East German Secret Service people, were an absolute menace. There were 5,000 of them. They used to follow us, try and prevent us doing what we were doing, block our route, block us in, call the Russians to try and get us detained for doing things we actually weren't probably doing. But they were following me once, and I was really, really bored of these 2. And we parked our car beside a canal, not on a road. And the Stasi car came in about 200 yards behind us, watching us. I said, right, this is how we get rid of them. I will get out and walk, and they'll follow me. So I walked about a mile and told the sergeant also to walk about a mile to meet up with me. And then the car, at exactly 20 past, is to then roar up the edge of the wood, pick us up and drive off. We'll hope the 2 Stasis follow us. Sure enough, I got out of the car, walked my mile to this corner of this wood, and stopped with this East German Stasi following me. He kept about 100 yards behind me. Next thing I knew, my staff sergeant, he appeared to join up with me, with the other Stasi watching him. And then, sure enough, the car roared up to us and four-wheel drive, picked us up, drove us back to the car, the Stasi car, which they had left unlocked with the keys in the ignition. So as the Stasis came running up towards us, charged up towards us, I waved the keys at them and threw them in the canal. Not how to make with the Stasi. And the only other thing we did, which was very naughty, was that there was a certain place where all the Russian trains would arrive with all their equipment, unload, ready to do river crossing exercises across the Elbe. It's a place called Sandau, S-A-N-D-A-U. But the person who was the absolute pain there was the station master. And as soon as he saw us, he'd shake his fist at us. Member of the Communist Party, he was the local mayor as well, and he'd ring up the Russians, and the Russians would then come up and try and block us in and detain us. So I thought long and hard about this and thought, right, I know what I'm going to do. So the next time we went, there were the Stasi guy, he was there, with some Russian officers. And I then drove up to the station master, got out, gave him a wonderful box of chocolates and a lovely bottle of whiskey, shook his hand and thanked him very much indeed. And the Russians, why are you giving him all this? Oh, he's so helpful. He always tells us when tank trains are coming into the station, so we're able to be ready to photograph them. Sadly, he was not seen again. What happened to him, I don't know. But hopefully he will just do a couple of months in a prison somewhere. But I'll end with a nice story, and that is how we were driving along the banks of the River Elbe in our car, and suddenly a boy of about 12 came charging out, blocked our way, and put his bicycle in front of the car, which I'm afraid we accidentally ran over. So I said, Junge, what have you done? Why are you doing that? Oh, the Russians have dug a car trap for you further down the line. And sure enough, the Russians had dug a pit about 10 feet deep and long enough and wide enough to take one of our cars, covered it with bits of timber, and put sods and clods of earth over the top, so our car would drive into it. So I said, Junge, thank you very much indeed for that. But look at your bike. And he burst into tears. Had to wait 3 years to get a bicycle. Tell me where you live. Give us your address. So he did, and he lived just down the road. I said, right, we'll be back next Saturday. Tell your father we're arriving at 1 o'clock. We will come to the back door, having come through the wood, to leave your bicycle. A new bicycle from the west. Really? Yes. So he had to walk back, pushing the remains of his bike. And 4 days later, we knew where the place was, and we knew his address, knew how to get to the car by coming in through the wood. And we put a brand new bicycle, a West German bicycle, outside his back door. I remember saying, Junge, are you there? And an adult male voice was the father. I said, yes. There's a new bicycle here for you. Thank you very, very much, he said, in German, as did the father. And then next day, we drove past, and there he was in the street with his brand new bicycle that his West German uncle had brought him. Ha, ha, ha. I could go on with many other stories, but I'm supposed to stop after half an hour. But again, I hope you've sort of got the idea of what it was like to be a member of the British military mission based in East Germany with our task of espionage. I end on the story, which is not a sad story, but it's why I had to leave in September 1980. I received information that the fact was that the Russians were going to test a brand new surface-to-air missile system that is called on the GAZ-66. It's basically tubes of rockets you've seen firing in Syria and Iraq and all the rest of it, but on an air-portable lorry, a smallish lorry. No one has seen them before. No one knew what they were. So what we did, the night before, around about 1 o'clock in the morning, making sure I wasn't being followed, I drove onto the Russian training area, with our headlights, we knew where we were, went to the observation post, but we hid the car overnight. And just before dawn, the sergeant and I got out of the car with my camera, went to the observation post, which was a road through the, which could see this road through the wood. And sure enough, after about an hour and a half, down the road came all these brand new Russian surface-to-surface missile systems. And I photographed them, and I also, they stopped not too far away from me. I was able to put my zoom lens, my 2,000 millimeter lens, onto the site so we would know exactly what these, how far they could fire. Anyhow, so I finished off my film and said, right, better go back to the car. And as we were walking back to where our car was, 4 guys in heavily camouflaged uniform and camouflaged faces leapt out and jumped me and the staff sergeant. They grabbed my camera before I could expose the film, and that was it. We then went back to the frog march back to the car, where the driver was there with a pistol at his head, and an officer appeared and said, right, where's your identity card? I said, here we are. Here's my Soviet Army identity card. I'm Major Ritchie of the British Army, attacked for Soviet External Relations Branch here. Right, wait there. 5 minutes later, another officer came, said, give me your identity card. So I'd given it to the other officer. What do you mean, given it to the other officer? I'm the only Soviet Army officer here. You've no identity on you? You must be a spy. Arrest him. So they sandbagged me, put sandbags over me, threw me in the back of a Soviet lorry. Interestingly, they only hit me with the palm of their hand, with the soles of their feet, so as not to bruise me. Took me back to the Soviet Army, near the Soviet Army barracks, where it was a rather unpleasant experience, which I won't tell you what I actually witnessed. Put in the cell, and they then interrogated me, again just by screaming and shouting at me and pushing me with hands and soles of their feet. And eventually I said I was there, you can see, because they'd exposed my film. Sorry, you know, whatever you do for a film, get it, words not exposed, they turned it into photographs. Unfortunately, the first 2 frames, 1 and 2, what we always did, photographed either wildlife, wild pig, or some rare birds. And I then explained these photographs. I said, yes. I said, as you see from frames 1 and 2, I was photographing a wild boar family. And there really were films of a wild boar, his wife and a couple of piglets on it. And I said, and then suddenly, while in the middle of photographing it, down the road came some East German pipeline trucks. As you can see, these are lorries with pipes on them. It's Major Ritchie, you know those aren't pipes. Those are surface-to-surface missile tubes. No, are they? Oh, I am sorry, because you know I'm not allowed to photograph military equipment. Explain how you zoomed in on the sighting system, and you can clearly read the range of how far these missiles could fire. I said, I'm sorry, I must have been so angry that I accidentally pressed the zoom button. Well, they let me go, and they then withdrew my identity card, and the Russians gave a farewell party for me in the Russian Officers Club in Potsdam. And the Chief of Staff was a 3-star general, and all the British military mission were there, and Americans and French. It was a very good party, because I'd made sure I looked after the Russians whenever they came to West Berlin. And the general stood out and said, Major Ritchie, in saying goodbye to you tonight, 3 things. 1, we have enjoyed your company. 2, we understand, in spite of recent difficulties we've had with you, you're being promoted to a lieutenant colonel, again in command of a battalion of infantry soldiers in Northern Ireland. Congratulations, they all clapped. Thirdly and finally, and give you this present of a Soviet officer's fur hat as a reminder and a souvenir of your time with us. I have to say, professionally speaking, on behalf of every Soviet officer here tonight, we're all delighted you're leaving. And that was it. They all clapped, and I then left. And that's it. How are we doing?
This is Mary Carrington in California. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You know, the wall became iconic, you know, so when the Soviet Empire came down, do you think that, could you comment on sort of philosophically why it was built and how it was built, and was it intended as the symbol of the Cold War?
Well, in fact, the reason it was built was because of the number of people that were all going across. Any trained East German knew they could get a better job and a better everything if they transferred themselves to East Germany. Now, I actually have here the figures of the number of people who escaped and crossed the border, because otherwise all there was before the war went up was just a white line in the road, and so anybody could do that. And I did have here, yes, from the time East Berlin became East Berlin until the time the wall came up, 197,000 East Germans had escaped up until 1960. And after 1960, 153,000 escaped in the first 6 months of 1961. And it was to basically prevent their citizens leaving, the wall went up. That was why the wall went up, to keep their citizens. And it was a very, very efficient, because I knew what it was like, having approached it from the East German side. The first German side was a ditch. So you drive into a ditch. Then there were barriers. Then there was a barbed wire fencing. There were obstacles set up, roadblock, before you actually hit the fence, and there was a minefield. So it was almost impossible to escape after the wall went up. And so it was not only symbolic, it was actually practical, and it ran the full length of the border between East Germany and West Germany. And that was it. So it was done simply to stop all their doctors, dentists, everybody from escaping. They all wanted to live in West Germany, because life in East Germany was not easy at all. You couldn't do anything, couldn't buy anything. But that helped.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so we do have a few more minutes. Any other questions?
Sir, have you written a book, or has there been a movie done about your life? I would love to see it.
That's interesting, because my wife has been recording this, because you're not the only person. And I will be writing a book. It will be called Only Ladies Curtsy. And I'll tell you the story, because I'm going to cover in great detail East Germany, but only the funny side, not the serious side of life. And it's called Only Ladies Curtsy, because I was the ADC, the aide de camp, sort of personal assistant to the British governor in East Germany, British governor in Australia. And I remember getting ready for a visit by the governor, and the mayor, huge man, the mayor, said, "Oh, so we can show our wives, could you please show us how to curtsy?" So I showed him how to do a curtsy. And on the day that the governor arrived, I stepped off the train. I said, "Your Excellency, may I the honour present Councillor Widgery, Shah President of the Shire of Witchy-Proof." Whereupon this 280-pound, 14-stone man did a faultless curtsy. So I had to walk down the line saying, "Only ladies curtsy, gentlemen just nod their heads." So there we go. Yes, I will be.
We'll be waiting for it to come out.
I better write it before August.
Yeah.
Did you speak German or Russian?
No, interestingly, all members of the mission, except myself and the technical officer, all spoke fluent Russian. I spoke German and French, because I had to liaise with the French, so that we, the Americans and the French, didn't trip each other over. Because we split East Germany into 3 zones, a British zone, a French zone, and an American zone. And we always made sure there were 2 nations there, so they could never know whether it was a British mission or a French mission, or whose mission was with us. And we changed over illogically every 10, 11, or 12 days. So, because we looked the same, we had the same vehicles, and the Russians, when they spotted us, would be asked, who were they? We also used to spray our number plates with a light oil spray and then throw dust over them, so they could never tell what car it was, and we then cleared up when we got back to Potsdam. Right, next question.
Other questions?
Charles, it's Tammy. I'm wondering if you could share with us, you're going to be joining us on our trip when we hit Berlin.
Indeed.
And you are going to be showing us some things that a typical tourist guide would not be showing us. Could you share a couple of the places you're going to take us to?
Well, obviously what I do is I take it to where our headquarters were and where the American headquarters were. I'd also take you to an old Soviet Army barracks, because the last time I was there, it was just derelict, and you could get in and show you where the Russians were, go to a training area, and this is where they would train, and that sort of incident. I even might take you to a place called Troyen-Bridgeton, where on the level railway crossing, on my first ever tour, the level crossing gate came down to block the way, and coming the other way was a column of Russian surface-to-surface missile vehicles. And when the gate went up, the Russian indicated to him, and they ran over my car. But our cars, you see, weighed nearly 4 tons, because they had a steel armored case in the middle. And so this 8-wheeled lorry mounted the bonnet, squashed the car, the roof came down, but none of us were ill, but the car was completely, totally, utterly ruined. And it gives you a feeling of what it was like.
Amazing.
So that's what I could do. But I'm not sure I could take it to an old bunker. The old bunkers are still there, but that's rather a long way from Berlin.
Well, this is very, very exciting, and we very, very much look forward to meeting you and sharing your adventures.
Well, delighted.
Yes. I've got one more question, if nobody else has one, which has to do with the wall itself. Obviously, the wall was huge at one point, and
Correct.
we visited not too much time after the wall came down. What has kind of happened? Has it been tipped away and all taken away, or kind of what does it look like these days?
It's about 95% of the wall is gone. But nearly all of it has. But they've kept bits of it up so you can still see it. And there's also a lovely old building there where people used to escape by throwing a rope over the wall. The friends on the West Berlin side of the wall would then tie the rope up to a towing hook on the back of a vehicle, tighten it, people would then slide down using a piece of cloth over it. That's still there. And but the wall, there are actual bits of the wall that are still exactly as they were. And we will go, which is also in West Berlin, the Soviet Army War Memorial, which won't now, but did when I was there, have Soviet soldiers coming to it. We had to escort them there in case people would throw paint and stones at them.
Oh.
Any more questions?
We're looking forward to more stories.
Good. Oh well, I've got quite a lot of them, but it's more interesting if you do it in the place it actually happened.
Yes.
But there we go. Like my last story is the East Berlin Opera. I was going to the East Berlin Opera through the American Checkpoint Charlie with some guests. Went to the opera because we were allowed to buy the best tickets to the opera. But I said, listen to my duty sergeant in West Berlin, listen, I'm going to the opera tonight. Don't ring me unless it's really, really urgent. And right up, went to get up. So there we were with my old-fashioned mobile phone, like a brick. And just towards the end of the first act, sitting in the opera house, surrounded by Soviet Army and East German soldiers, the girl then went, da-da-da-da, and my mobile phone went, hello, will Major Ritchie please go to the nearest telephone? So I grabbed the phone to turn the volume down to nil, but I had it on the wrong way round, and it went up to full volume. So in the middle of the opera, the voice went, Well, Major Ritchie, please go to the nearest telephone. So at the interval, I had to get into my car, drive across Checkpoint Charlie, went to the thing, rang the duty sign, said, what was it? Oh, sorry, sir, I forgot you were in the opera. I said, son Johnson, when I get back, I'm going to kill you. And the duty police sergeant said, I'm sorry, sir, I've got to report to you. What? So I just heard you threatening to kill a non-commissioned officer. And I said, I was only joking. I don't care, sir, I've got to report exactly what you said. Anyhow, so the next day I had to go and apologise, explain myself. So there we go. So on that note, we'll end.
All right.
Charles.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Whetted our appetite very well for the trip to Berlin.
That was 1 hour, 1 minute, and 10 seconds.
This was great.
Charles,
Thank you.
it was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.